Hey, folks, it's just Poe and I this week. The last couple episodes, we had Laura Jones on the podcast talking about grit. So if you haven't checked out those two podcasts, when we got finished recording that podcast, a story that both and I independently came to our minds was this story. It's of the ancient Chinese farmer parable. Which, if you haven't heard this story, that's what Poe's gonna read it for us. I'm gonna do a little bit of acting to make it fun. Paul, why don't you kick us off?
In the second century BC, in ancient China, along the northern border of China and what's now today Mongolia, there was a Chinese farmer. There's different versions of this story, but in this version, there's a farmer who was feeling really down and out because his farm just wasn't doing well. So he went to the local guru to complain about his plight and seek advice. The guru's response to his story:
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
farmer found the guru's surprising advice really disappointing and confusing. He tossed and turned that night, unable to sleep for worry about his situation. His head spun, imagining his family's awful future. When the farmer woke up in the morning, he was shocked to see that a wild horse had entered his yard. It was an impressive, strong stallion that he'd be able to harness and use to work in the fields. Ecstatic, the farmer ran to tell the guru about his good fortune. The guru's response to his story:
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
wow, the farmer thought, I didn't see that coming. Farmer invested all the money he had left in seeds. He planted his seeds with the help of the horse. Spring turned into summer and fall, and just as it was time to bring in the harvest, the farmer woke one morning to find that the horse had run away. Farmer was despondent. He'd spent all his money on seeds, nurtured the plants all summer, and now he couldn't even see how he could bring in the harvest. Feeling anxious and overwhelmed, the farmer returned to the guru. After listening to the story, the guru simply said,
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
ah, this can't be good, thought the farmer. The next day, the stallion returned and brought with him a mare. Now the farmer had two horses to help bring in the crops and would be able to have horses into the future as the pair could produce offspring. The farmer excitedly told the guru this wonderful news. The guru's response:
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
the next day, the farmer's son was riding the stallion while he was helping with the harvest. The son was bucked off the horse and sustained injuries that would incapacitate him for months. Overcome with grief and worry, the farmer returned to the guru. Again, the guru said,
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad.
"Ha, really? How could this be good?" thought the farmer. The next week, army recruiters came to town. The country was at war with the invading Huns, and all able bodied young men were taken off to fight at the front lines. The son's injuries saved him from having to go off to fight.
Maybe it's good, maybe it's bad. Maybe
Maybe. So,
it's somewhere in between. Maybe it's both. Obviously, it's a story of things go back and forth. When things are good, you're like, it's good. When things are bad, you're like, how can this happen to me? At the end, it's my whole takeaway on these types of things is in life, there's good and bad. There's an exercise that we do where it's called life's lines, but you have your life all on this line, and you're like, these are the good years, these are the bad years. Your parents died, your dog died, your business wasn't doing well. It can be a very triggering exercise for some people. You generally realize that this thing goes up and down like a wave, and there will be down times, and
yeah.
it's the yin and yang. Without the yin, you don't have the yang. Without the good times, you don't have the bad times. My takeaway is you celebrate the good times and you enjoy it. When the bad times, you try not let it get to you, right? Because
Yeah.
hopefully it'll come back the other way. But anytime you can think in your past where something happened and it turned out to be good, I think this is part of the exercise everybody needs to be doing out there is write these stories down because these are the confidence boosters that we talked about in last week's
Oh.
podcast, or maybe it was part one, where you're trying to build confidence boosters for yourself. If you're somebody who hasn't gone through
Mm.
shit in life, you need to really journal and search for these types of things. When they do, you have the confidence.
Yeah, I love this story because it's simple but so profound, right? And I think the lessons from it are just gold. So whether it's like simple everyday annoyances, being stuck in traffic, right, on the highway, I'll even think of this story, right? Like that. Hey, you know what? Yeah, I'm running late. That sucks. But who knows? If there wasn't this traffic and I was actually like further ahead, maybe I would have gotten into an accident. You don't know. And it helps just give you that perspective to be in the moment that you're only in the present, but your present perspective could be very different than the perspective of actually looking back on this. Right. And you won't know until you get to that point.
But it's really hard to look
Mhm.
back, or if you look back at all the junk things that happened to you, it's really hard to find a way unless you're a super negative person to
Mhm.
be like, "Oh, it didn't work its way out." It probably didn't work out next day or 3 months from then or
Yeah.
6 months or a year, but eventually, like, the water does roll downhill. Along the similar lines, there's the Chinese word for crisis is, I think, "weiqi," and I'm not
Yeah.
pronouncing that, but it's the
Which is also
same
means as opportunity.
if that doesn't double meaning right there. But yeah, there's two people out there, right? When people go through this crucible experience, there's people that fall like flies and there's other people that become emboldened and rise up. You got to
Yeah.
decide which one you are.
Yeah, and another thing highly recommend is this practice journaling. And one of the advantages of journaling is if you have done it enough, then down the road you can look back at your earlier journal entries, right? And you can look back on things that at the time were negative or hardships, right? And you get to see what you wrote down as your perspective during that time, right? And now you get to revisit it with the wisdom of this hindsight, right? And you can now give your old story, these old hardships, like new meaning, just by this process of journaling.
And applying it to the current hill you're climbing now.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
I gotta admit, I don't do the journaling thing. To me, my excuse it takes too long, but I do recognize it that
Yeah.
that is a good usage for
Yeah.
that.
Oh, yeah. What's something in your life that at the time it was like a real hardship, and now looking back was probably a major blessing in disguise?
Like entrepreneurship, like things happen all the
Yeah.
time. You work with bad people. Nothing ever goes the way it's planned. But there were definitely some like decision nodes that moved me one way or the other, where I think part of it was just like risk mitigation too. As long as you
Yeah.
don't get knocked out of the game, you stay in there, you eventually do get to the right place. I guess I'm looking at more from a high level there. Honest, I haven't really gone through these like life changing death
Mm.
experiences. So this is I think why I do this work with you, right?
Mm.
Like we're here is because the big one is coming is maybe that's a horrible attitude, but I want to have somewhat of these skills and practices in place for when they do. Anything from your experience that you can backtrace on your lifelines and how did
Yeah. I
it
mean,
play out?
I would say there's one example that always is still fresh in my mind, the death of my father in 2005. That was the year he took his life, right? Committed suicide, and it was a big surprise to all of us and really turned our world like upside down in many ways and extremely difficult on my mother and just for our entire family. We had a very difficult relationship growing up. Think my brothers had their own experience, but I think it was in many ways like traumatic. There was a lot, yeah, there was a lot of like violence growing up, and definitely was a. We could tell it was a difficult marriage, right, between him and my mom. None of us expected that he would just take his life and just leave like that. Now, with a lot of time and a lot more life experience, I think a lot of good came out of it, right? It's probably too many to list, but some of the top takeaways from his premature death. From that trauma, I never wanted like my kids to go through something like that. And I also understood that from a science background, because he's my biological father, statistically, that means there's an increased risk of suicide and depression in myself. So I knew I never wanted to be in that situation. I knew I never wanted to put my kids in that situation. So it really gave me this motivation to prioritize mental health, prioritize personal development, right? Or to do things differently than what we were in a lot of ways like raised to do, which is that scarcity mindset of work hard now, save, and then you can retire once you have a nest and like a big enough nest egg. I saw how that worked out for my dad and my family because he never got to enjoy his retirement, right? So He worked his tail off for all these years, but his life was imbalanced in such a way that he never got to make it into his 60s even. Yeah, so that was such a powerful lesson to me and really shaped my priorities
Because if it
as
was a mild experience, they wouldn't
yeah,
have, um,
correct. Yeah.
inspired you or forced you to make life-changing changes.
Yeah, because yeah, he and my mom, they raised us in this very like old school tiger parent kind of way. And that's what they knew that these were the tools that they had at the time. And but when they grew up, when they came over as immigrants, they didn't have all these resources that we have now. They were trying their best. But yeah, but now I realize they had such heavy burdens and they dealt with such heavy pressures and difficulties assimilating to a new country, moving somewhere where they didn't know anyone. So it's a huge factor. It's a huge motivator for me to when I think about the legacy that I want to leave for my kids.
Going back to the could be good, could be bad,
Yeah.
you took that story and you spun the narrative your way. It could have very well, and probably most people would have taken that as my dad was a jerk. I'm going to be an alcoholic. I'm going to go down
Mm,
this path. So
yeah.
you rewriting the narrative yourself is a big part of it. What people are going through at this current time. Statistically, it's half of the people. If you're
Mm,
thinking half good, half bad, you rewrite that narrative.
yeah.
I had a chance to think of my story and also tell it from a lens of like Tony Robbins says things happen to you or for you, not to you,
Yes. Yeah. I
kind
love
of
that
along
quote.
the same lines. But there's some things where you choose to write the narrative. I think
Yeah.
that's like your story. There's other times where things just happen to you and
Mm,
you react a certain way. So, like my story, I think a lot of people can relate. You're working a job. I think I was working at this company for 7, 8 years. So, quite a while in this
mm,
modern age. And yeah, it was never really that great of a gig for me. Of course, I was always investing in real estate on the side, doing that whole song and dance. But
yeah.
there come a point at the end where didn't have a very good management over me and got put on this what they call these things. I forget these improvement plans, right?
Mm,
When you're messing up. And I took it pretty hard because it's, yeah, try your best, even though maybe I wasn't putting 100% effort into it. You know, you take pride in what you do. So that was a big thing. And to get to a point where it's just, it sends you into a shock, right?
yeah.
And I think not a lot of people talk about this, but I think it happens to everybody. Some people even more than once or twice, which
Yeah.
maybe then you're a bad employee, right? It happens to you more than a few times. But I think you always run into people and you're like, I got to take myself and go work and make a living wage at somewhere else and move. And I obviously found another job and that I really liked. I liked the coworkers, I liked the management. So it was a great move. The takeaway that I wanted to highlight was, man, did I stay stuck in a somewhat 7 out of 10 situation or 6 out of 10 situation. It wasn't that bad. And without that issue happening, I wouldn't have gotten on, I don't know what we did back then, LinkedIn, find a new job
Yeah.
and talk to some people. Sometimes, yeah, I can look back, it's the situation was okay, maybe even okay,
Yeah.
good. But without that event happening, I wouldn't have got moving and moved off to a better situation. And with the perspective, like you said, in
Yeah.
hindsight, why the hell didn't I do that earlier?
Yeah. It's really interesting and funny how a lot of things have a way of working out and blessings in disguise
I was
that
sure afraid at the time,
mm,
uncertain, out of my comfort zone, but it ended up a lot better.
yeah.
It took a while though. I think the way we close this for folks listening is that you guys can take this and we try to make these podcasts actionable for folks and that way you can apply what we're talking about here in your guys' situations.
Yeah.
It's a free format. Share it with your friends, but hopefully it's useful for you guys. If you guys ever want like that coaching aspect, some accountability, that's what Dr. Poe is here for. Reach out via email or I was going to say write a comment, but sometimes people don't like to air their dirty laundry on the comment thread of YouTube. But yeah, just feel free to shoot us email and we'll catch you guys on the next show.